In this video, I'll go over how to use the snow toolset to turn this into this. So let's do it. You can get the snow toolset from the link in the description. It consists of a material function, a Houdini digital asset, and a material. Let's start with how to use the material function. Let's add it to this QuickSell asset. Select the mesh and press Ctrl B to browse it. Duplicate the material by pressing Ctrl D and add a snow to its name. Assign the new material to the mesh and open it. Let's scroll down and browse its parent. Duplicate it and again add a snow to its name and open it. Let's maximize this. Right click and under Houdini, there's the snow tool material function. Add it and we should add it between these two nodes. So let's do it. I'm gonna use nanoid displacement in the material. You can use it without the displacement feature too, but it looks so much better when using it. In case you don't know how to enable nanoid displacement for your project, watch this video. Select the main material node and in the details tab search for nanoid. If you're using Unreal Engine 5.4 or later, you can use nanoid tessellation. So enable tessellation and use with nanoid. I'm using the 5.3 version for this video, so I'm only gonna enable use with nanoid. We should also change the shading model to subsurface. Save the material and close it. In the material instance, let's use this one as the parent. And as you can see, a snow is added on the mesh, and up here in the material instance we have the snow parameters. Let's enable all of them and go over them one by one. First, let's assign the snow textures. I've already downloaded a snow material from the Megascans library. In the content, Megascans, surfaces, I've already downloaded this snow material, so let's open the folder and assign the textures. Base color, normal, and ORDP, which stands for occlusion, roughness, and displacement. Let's also assign a blend texture. I mostly use the Perlin noise texture from the starter content, so let's search for it and add it. Now let's go over the parameters. We can control how much snow is visible with the snow amount value. When it's 0, there's no snow, and when it's 1, we see all the snow. Size controls the size of the snow textures. It's in world space units, that's why the default value is 100, which is 1 meter. Roughness and normal parameters are self-explanatory. By default, it's assumed that the base mesh and the snow don't have displacement. If the base mesh has displacement, we should enable this option. Right now, if I enable it, the mesh changes, but it's not correct because its master material doesn't have displacement set up. So let's disable it. We can enable displacement only for the snow. When we enable it, a new displacement amount parameter for the snow appears here. The default value is 0, which means it has no displacement. But if I increase it, we can see how it works. A value of around 0.8 is good. So here's without displacement and here's with displacement. Now right now displacement works for me, but if it doesn't work for you, make sure that nanoid is enabled for the mesh. To do that, browse to the mesh, and for that select the mesh in the viewport and press Ctrl B to browse it. Right click on it and under nanoid make sure that it's enabled. If the material of the base mesh is subsurface, we should enable this option. By default, it's assumed that it's not subsurface, so it's disabled. These two parameters control the subsurface amount and color of the snow. So we can decrease it or increase it, and we can change the color. The default values are fine. Now these parameters control the snow material, and these parameters control how the snow blends with the mesh. So let's go over them. The blend texture we went over, If we don't have it, it looks like this. Size controls the size of the blend texture. We can change it to see how it works. All of these parameters help us control how the snow blends with the mesh. The names pretty much explain what each parameter does. The final parameter adds the snow in detailed areas. By default it's set to 0, but let's increase it to see how it works. As you can see, more snow is being added in the cracks and the crevices. It adds a whole new level of detail to the mesh. So here's when detail is set to 0, here's when it's set to 0.5, 1, 1.5 and 3. 3 is the maximum value. Let's set it to 1 and continue. The great thing when using this function is that when we rotate the mesh, the snow is always on the top. The material function adds a snow in the material level. If we want to have actual snow geometry, we should use the HDA. Before using the HDA, I prefer to do a couple of things. First, I change the layout a little bit. So let's move the outliner to this side of the viewport and change the size. And let's make the details tab a little bit wider. This way I have more control over the HDA parameters. Open the material of the mesh, disable the snow, and for now set the snow amount to 0. We'll set it back to 1 once we're done with the HDA. Save and close the material, and let's add the HDA to the level. It either creates the Houdini engine session automatically, or we can click on Houdini engine up here and create a session. When the Houdini session is connected, we can see that Houdini engine session is ready and the parameters are there. If you wanna know how to get and install the Houdini engine plugin, watch this step-by-step tutorial. It's a prerequisite to use any HDA inside Unreal Engine. So here it is, select the Houdini logo and in the details tab, scroll down until you see the Houdini parameters. It has 4 tabs: snow, scale, noise and optimization. But first scroll down a little more to get to the Houdini inputs. We have 2 inputs, mesh and limited area. Limited area is optional. I'll show you how to use it later in the video. Mesh is where we can select the assets that we want to add a snow on top of. So here click on geometry input and set it to world input. This way we can select the assets in the level. Down here click on start selection, and now we can select the objects we want to add a snow on top of from the viewport. We can select as many meshes as we want to add a snow on. So let's select this asset and click on use current. It starts processing and here it is. We can see that these spheres are added on the mesh. Now let's go over the parameters to see how we can edit it. On the very top we have the previous option and it's enabled by default. Previous gives us a faster way to see where the snow will be placed. It's useful when we want to quickly iterate between different parameters to choose the best one. If we disable it, the HDA creates the snow mesh. So let's do that. And here it is. Now we have the snow mesh. Now let's enable it to explain the other parameters. A spread angle controls where the snow will be added based on the angle of the surface of the mesh. As we increase this parameter, more of the mesh will be covered by snow. So let's set it to 15. This is how it looks with a spread angle of 15, and let's increase it to 45. This is how it looks with a spread angle of 45. And this is both cases with the previous option off. So let's set it to 30 and continue. Number of spheres controls the number of spheres we scatter on the mesh to create the snow. So this parameter can control the density of the snow. Here's how it looks with 500 spheres, 1500, 3500 and 7500. We should set it depending on how dense we want the snow to be. Let's set it back to 4000 and continue. Next we have density noise. It does as its name suggests. Right now we have snow everywhere on the asset within the spread angle we defined. Density noise removes some of the snow based on a noise pattern. Let's enable it. And some of the spheres are removed. Let's also check the snow mesh. And here's the snow mesh with density noise. Let's disable density noise. And here's the snow mesh without density noise. So let's enable previs and density noise and go over the density noise settings. We can set the type to either Perlin or Simplex. This is Simplex and this is Perlin. I mostly use the Perlin noise, but you can use the Simplex noise too. Amount controls the effectiveness of the noise. When it's 1, it's fully effective, and when it's 0, it's like the density noise is off. We can tweak this value to see what looks good. Let's continue with 0.7. Amplitude controls the density and can even reverse it. So when it's 1, this is the default look. If I decrease it, it decreases the number of spheres until it reaches 0. So when I set it to 0, there's no spheres and the density is 0. But the thing is that now we can continue decreasing it in the negative values. And when we set it to -1, we can see that we have reversed the noise. So this is with an amplitude of 1. And this is when it's -1. Let's set it to 1 and continue. Frequency controls the size of the noise. The higher the frequency, the smaller the size of the noise. It's like the tiling option in Unreal Materials. By default, it's set to 10 and it controls the frequency of the noise in all axes. If we set it to 20, this is the result. And if we set it to 5, this is the result. We can clearly see how the size of the noise pattern changes. Let's set it to 10 and continue. Using the offset parameters, we can move the noise in each axis. We're using 3D noise, that's why we can move it in the z-axis too. Let's disable the previous option to see how the snow mesh looks. And again, here's before and after using density noise. So let's disable it and continue. These two parameters control the smoothness of the snow mesh. The default values work just fine most of the time, so use them carefully. We can use them if there's something wrong with the snow mesh. Limited area gives us the option to only have snow on specific parts of the mesh. To use it, we should first add a limited area mesh from the input section. So let's scroll down. And here we have the limited area input. Let's first add a couple of meshes in the level to define where we want the snow to be added. Select the snow mesh and in the limited area section click on geometry input and set it to world input. Click on start selection, select these meshes and click on use current. Now let's scroll up to the parameters section and first enable the previous option. Now that we have defined the limited area meshes, if I enable the limited area option and wait a little bit, let's hide these meshes. We can see that now the snow is only added to these areas. The limited area operation parameter gives us the option to either delete the selected area or the non-selected area. By default, it deletes the non-selected area, so we only have the snow in the areas we have defined, but we can set it to delete selected too. This way we'll reverse it and remove the snow from the areas we have defined. So let's disable the limited area and the previous options and continue. When the snow is added on the mesh, it can sometimes create a visible seam. Blend steps can help us remove this seam or make it less visible, but to make it work, we should first add vertex color to the mesh. So let's enable it to see how it works. Now we can see that the snow mesh is black, and if we zoom in to the area where it blends with the base mesh, we can see some red color. Now blend steps controls the amount of the red area. For example, if I set it to -1, the red area disappears, and if I increase the steps to something like 3, it becomes more visible. A blend steps of 1 or 2 work just fine most of the time. So let's set it to 1. And let's disable the vertex color option for now. I'll enable it before baking the mesh. In the material section of the video, we'll use it. Next we have the scale parameters. Let's enable the previous option to better see what happens. A scale multiplier controls the uniform scale of the spheres. And the min and max scale can be used to add variety to the scale. Let's set them to 1 and continue. The height parameters control the height of the spheres. First, we can select how we want to affect the height. We can either affect it in the z-axis or perpendicular to the surface of the base mesh. Let's change the height multiplier to something like 0.6. By default, it affects it in the z-axis, and we can clearly see that. But if we set it to perpendicular to the surface and wait a little, we can see that now the orientation of the spheres has changed and is conformed to the surface of the base mesh. Again, min and max height can add randomness to the height values. Random seed changes the seed for both the min and max scale and min and max height. Let's set the min scale to 0.3, max scale to 0.9, and do the same for the min and max height. Now if we change the random seed value, we can have different results. Let's disable the previous option to see how the snow mesh looks. If at any point you want more or less snow, just enable the previous option and tweak the parameters again. In this case, I want more snow, so let's enable it and tweak the scale parameters. Let's set the scale multiplier to 2 and the height multiplier to 1.5. And let's disable the previous option to see how the snow looks now. This looks better now. Under the snow tab, let's also increase the smooth filter radius to 2. Next, we have the noise parameters. We can add the top noise, the side noise, or both of them at the same time. So let's enable the top noise. As you would suspect, it adds noise to the top of the snow mesh. The default values are harsh. Let's go over the parameters. Amplitude is the intensity of the noise. Size controls the size, and roughness and smooth strength both control the smoothness of the noise. Let's set the size to something like 3 and the amplitude to 0.5. Now we can see its effect by disabling and enabling the top noise. If we increase the roughness to 1, it becomes rougher, and if we decrease it to 0, it becomes very smooth. A value of 0.75 is good. A smooth strength works the same but in reverse. Higher values make the mesh smoother and lower values make it rougher. So let's increase it to 20 and let's decrease it to 0 and it becomes really rough. The default value is fine. The side noise parameters are the same. Let's enable it and let's decrease the amplitude to 0.5. That's better. It helps remove the smooth look of the snow on the sides. Let's also increase the roughness to 0.8. Okay, that's good. Next, we have the optimization parameters. The first one controls whether we want to optimize the mesh or not, and the second one controls how much we want to optimize it. I want to use nanite, so I want to optimize the mesh, but let's see how it works. From up here, let's set the view mode to wireframe, zoom in on the snow mesh, and enable it. By default, it reduces the try count to 50%, but we can change it to any value we want. Let's disable it and continue. After we're happy with how it looks, we should bake the digital asset into a mesh. But before that, under the Snow tab, let's enable the Add Vertex Color option and make sure the blend steps is set to 1. Scroll up and click on the Bake button. And it's done. Here it is in the outliner, and if I press Ctrl B to browse it, here it is in the content browser in this directory which Houdini creates. So let's convert it to nanite. Save it, and also let's open the material of the base mesh and set the snow amount to 1. Now we can either delete the HDA from the level or keep it to add a snow on top of other meshes. So let's delete it for now. Now let's go over the snow material I've provided with this toolset. It's here in the materials folder. Let's open it. If you're using Unreal Engine 5.4 or the versions after that, you should first enable nanite tessellation from within the material. So open the material, in the details tab search for nanite and enable nanite tessellation. Save the material and close it. But if you're using the 5.3 version like me, you don't need to do that. So right click on the material and create a material instance. Save it, assign it to the snow mesh and open it. Let's enable all the parameters. First we should assign the textures. I'm gonna use the snow textures that we used for the material function. So let's go to content, mega scans, surfaces, melting snow and assign the textures. Base color, normal and ORDP. We need an extra texture for the detail normal. It should be a normal texture with a small details. In this case the main normal texture has a lot of small details. We can open it to check that. So I'm gonna use it for the detail normal. If we decrease the base color texture amount to 0, the material will use a default white color. So we can use a texture for the base color or just use the simple color. Size controls the size of these textures. The material uses world align nodes, so that's why the default value is 100. Also because of the world align nodes, the snow mesh doesn't need to have UVs. Specular roughness and the normal parameters are pretty much self-explanatory. And next we have the detail normal parameters. This is the texture which we assigned earlier. This is the detail normal size. We can change it to see how it works. And this is the detail normal strength. Let's increase it to see how it works. 1.5 is good. This is without the detail normal. And this is with the detail normal. These are the subsurface parameters. We can control its amount. This is without subsurface, and this is when the amount is set to 1, and this is the color. The default values are fine. Displacement is by default disabled. We can enable it and tweak these parameters to control how it looks. Let's increase the brightness to something like 1.5 and the contrast to 1.7 or 2. This is with displacement and this is without displacement. I like it. And finally we have the dithering section of the material. It can be used to remove the seams where the snow intersects with the base mesh. It works within the range we defined in the HDA section of the video. Only the red areas will be affected. So let's enable it to see how it works. Let's zoom in where the snow mesh intersects with the base mesh and enable the parameters. We can see the effect better if we set it to a higher value like 3. If we zoom in, we can see how the snow mesh is fading away where it intersects with the base mesh. This is when the amount is set to 0 and this is when I set it to 3. The noise parameters control the noise added in these areas. Pay attention to where the snow mesh intersects with the base mesh. This is without dithering and this is when I set it to 3. It looks so much better. And that's it. Again, you can get this toolset from the link in the description. Click here for more Unreal stuff and thank you so much for watching. Also, a special thanks to my patrons for making this possible. Like this video, subscribe and join our communities. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below. So, see you in the next one.